Standby, main, battle, end of battle. These are some of the most iconic and terrifying words you'll ever hear playing Yu-Gi-Oh! As they're also associated with something very dangerous. Evenly Matched is a very interesting card as it's always been seeing play ever since its release back in 2018. The card is typically considered to be one of the best board breakers going second, and for a very good reason. While you have an empty board and at the cost of your battle phase, going second you can use it to pretty much banish every card your opponent controls face down except for one. Obviously, your opponent will choose the card to keep, but if your opponent goes neck 10 with this card, then you already achieved your job. Yeah, I've seen everything. This card has been particularly good against trap decks historically because they usually commit their entire hand onto the back row, and once you use this, well, they go kinda neck 4. Like I said, I can't even begin to imagine the amount of times I've seen trap decks scoop to this card's activation. Sometimes even scooping to the opponent saying battle phase. Literally one of the most rage quit inducing cards I've ever seen in my life. Hell, even against combo decks, this card could be pretty nasty. As long as they don't have like a negation for it, you could pick up almost all of their threats. Unfortunately though, or fortunately depending on the perspective, this card does have some limitations and drawbacks. But before I go any further, I kinda wanna make something very clear. In this video, I'm only going to be talking about the Evenly Matched and its applications, and not really like a hypothetical world in which you're drawing this card alongside other ideal cards to draw. Anyways, now let's get started. So first of all, again, when you use this card going second, your opponent typically keeps at least one card on the field, which is not the best. And I'm saying that because sometimes one card is all you need to win. I mean, imagine this card against Purely. As long as they keep their Expurely Noir, they kind of just have it. Like, they're not gonna care if you banish their field spell and their continuous spell. It changes nothing to their life. You can say the same about pretty much any other Protect the Castle strategy where one boss monster just is enough to apply a lot of pressure. And again, this card is not gonna be doing jack shit against cards that already applied their effects as lingering abilities such as Abyss Dweller and D-Barrier. The good news is, if you do get hit by one of these cards, you could at least still banish a bunch of cards your opponent controls and reduce the game state to like a simplified game state. The bad news is, whenever you play against a high-level player, this strategy becomes a little less reliable. As a matter of fact, I would say that the existence of cards like Nibiru and Evenly Matched are, you know, the way you can actually see the contrast between low-level players and high-level players. Of course, you'll always find that Evenly Matched is broken when you keep running into players who overcommit into it. But again, this card will not always save you against pro players. They manage their resources way better and they always end on cards in hand as a follow. So they always think ahead of time and they always make sure to always end on a bunch of cards in hand to have a follow play for next turn. They don't overcommit too much, so even if the Evenly does hit them, it's not gonna destroy them completely. And again, if you do get hit by something with a lingering effect that hurts your deck, you're not going to be doing too much after resolving evenly. You're only really making your opponent lose cards, but you're not really giving yourself the ability to play. It's not like a card like Forbidden Droplet, for example, whereas you can use it to negate Abyss Dweller and at least have a shot to play. So these are good enough reasons to not really want to main deck Evenly Matched and at most to consider it a side deck option. My issue though is I believe that even as a side deck option, it still underperforms against the majority of decks in the meta right now. So the most popular competitive decks at the moment are Unchained, Tearlaments, and Purely. Obviously, we've already established how bad this card is against Purely because all they really need to win is one Expurely Noir and that's it, that's all. But it's also pretty bad against Unchained because when you use Evenly against them, they can chain the Escape to destroy their Unchained Soul of Rage, and then they can use the Graveyard effect of Yama to revive it back. All of that, by the way, while also keeping the DDD rank 6, so they're actually keeping 2 cards after you evenly them. So in other words, all you really did was trade 1 for 1 because you made them lose their trap card, but that's it. It's not the best. So this clearly won't solve any of your issues, especially considering the fact that most of these end boards stem from 1 or 2 card combos. So even after resolving Evenly Matched, you have 5 cards in hand, no more battle phase, they lose 1 interruption, which is the trap card, and they still have a bunch of cards in hand and a bunch of interruptions on the field. Definitely not ideal. I really can't understand why people don't think that this isn't a big deal. I'm saying that because the battle phase is one of the most important assets that you have at your disposal, and giving up on it is not really worth it unless you can actually make your opponent completely lose. Like, obviously, you can afford sacrificing your battle phase if you're using Evenly Matched to actually break a board. But definitely not if all you're doing is trade 1 for 1 or bait a negate. You want other cards to be the bait. You don't want Evenly to be the bait. You want Evenly to be the board breaker. Now, I will say this card can be good against Tearlaments, but the keyword here is can and not 100% is. They can search out the Crime, which is an Omni-Negate, or they can end on Baronne de Fleur, or the Grapha Fusion, so they can have upwards of 3 negations for it. So yeah, I wouldn't really be super confident relying on evenly matched against them. But to be fair, if they don't end on a negate, or you can take care of their negate, then evenly is actually really devastating against them. But again, I am talking about the scenario where you're only really relying on evenly and not really anything else. And my issue with evenly is that you actually have to use it very early on. You can't really use your engine to bait negates, because if your opponent doesn't take the bait, then your evenly is dead since you actually already committed to the board. And evenly is only really useful while you're on an empty board. So if you have like a bunch of monsters on the field or like a field spell already and you can't really get rid of it, then your evenly just doesn't do anything. Now, a pretty typical argument that I always hear is, yeah, Shine, none of this matters because evenly is only really good against trap decks anyways. But realistically though, the only trap deck that is really seeing much play right now is Labyrinth, and they don't really lose too much to evenly. I mean, I have never seen them lose to evenly, and I played the deck myself, and every single time I got even lead, I was actually in a good mood. Yeah, the card that actually destroyed me was Harpy's Feather Duster or Lightning Storm, not really evenly. But yeah, you can still go Eradicator, Virus, and even call spells on the evenly because your opponent is giving up on the battle phase, and without spell cards, your opponent's not going to be able to play on main phase 2. And if you're playing the furniture build, you're not even overcommitting to the spell and trap zone anyways, so you're not really going to be losing too much. I guess the only build that might truly lose to evenly would be the trap heavy build with Lord of the Heavenly Prison and a bunch of floodgates, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And also, you can't really use evenly over back removal because if they keep a floodgate and you don't have an out to it, you still lose. But to be fair, this only truly applies for Labyrinth. Now, another deck that can technically set a bunch of trap cards but isn't a trap deck would be Rescue Ace. You would want to believe that evenly is really good against them, and it can be, but just like Tearlaments, it can be, not necessarily it is good against them. Some Rescue Ace builds are playing the Firewall Dragon Terahertz package with Cyrus the Zabworm so that they have a negate for a spell or trap card. And some other builds turbo out Ibli that they give to their opponent, and again, if you have a card on your field, evenly is useless. And don't even think about crashing the Ibli because the Beat Cop will protect it, and they can also put their monsters in defense. So yeah, I'm not a really big fan of a card that can inherently be answered by your opponent's engine. It's not even like my opponent has to draw Solemn Judgment at this point. My opponent inherently plays around it. Now, evenly can be good against some other mid-range decks like Chimera, for example, if they don't discard it with their Chimera Fusion. But yet again, they also have natural answers to it in the form of the new Chimera Fusion. At the end of the main phase, they fuse into it and then they send something like End of Anubis or the Darkbearer statue. And then the Chimera level 6 fusion goes into the graveyard, and when you do resolve evenly, it's just not going to be enough because everything that really matters is in the graveyard. So yeah, after you resolve evenly, they can just chain their Chimera fusion to revive back their floodgate, and then you die. It's not really fun. Now again, evenly is definitely great against lesser prepared players, but let's not even talk about its applications against hardcore combo decks. It's pretty much always a neg 1. For example, against Dark World, you're never going to be able to even use evenly because they're always going to be able to hand loop you. And against Mana Dome, they just turbo out King Calamity and then they kind of skip your turn. And this is sad to say, but evenly is about to become way worse with the existence of Age of Overlord and SP Little Knight. That annoying Link 2 monster can temporarily banish 2 monsters on the field until the end phase in response to the evenly, so that means that you're gonna have to worry about 2 threats coming back to you very soon. Hand traps can simplify the game state by preventing your opponent from putting you in such a predicament. Obviously, everything is just a case-by-case situation, but my goal today was to cover up the worst and average case scenarios for this card. If you have to measure a card's relevance by looking at its best case situations, then you're daydreaming. You always have to be pessimistic and assume the worst, but hope for the best. And again, if the only card you are relying on breaking boards going second is evenly, then it's just not gonna be enough, I'm sorry. Anyways, that's all I had for this video, so guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts about this card in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.